Can I kick off and get started, Caroline? Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session of the SAMED 2021 Annual Conference, Great MedTech, Post-Pandemic, Adaptability, Resilience and Sustainability. My name is Amanda Wild, and I'm a member of the SAMED Code Committee. I will be facilitating this session on when healthcare and corruption intersect. We're looking forward to the session and request that our delegates make use of the chat or the question and answer facilities to ask any questions of our speaker. I'll keep an eye on both channels during this session for your questions. Corruption continues to undermine the sustainability of our healthcare system, and its negative impact predated the pandemic. However, during the pandemic, several matters emerged surrounding irregular PPE procurement, as well as the Digital Vibes contract. In this session, we look at the mandate of the Presidential Health Sector Anti-Corruption Forum, held by the Special Investigating Unit, what corruption has been encountered, and the impact that that corruption has had on the health sector. SAMED is a member of the Health Sector Anti-Corruption Forum. Here to share with us is Mr. Mdumiseni Nxumalo, Senior Manager, Risk, Special Investigating Unit. Mdu has vast experience in risk management, complemented by a number of qualifications that includes, amongst others, a postgraduate diploma in risk management. He is certified as an ethics officer by the Ethics Institute and a certified risk management practitioner by the Institute of Risk Management of South Africa.
Amanda,
yes.
If you could please sit a bit closer to the mic, we can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Caroline. Mdu is in one of the anti-corruption task team programs, which is responsible for the implementation of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, Pillar 6. The strategy promotes active citizenry and a whole-of-society approach in the fight against corruption. Pillar 6 is focused on protecting those vulnerable sectors, the health sector, local government, state-owned enterprises and NPOs that are prone to the manifestation of corruption and unethical practices through implementation of effective risk management and other proactive interventions. The HSACF has been established to foster collaboration and cooperation amongst the key stakeholders in the sector. The main objectives are to collaborate in the fight against corruption, identify areas of cooperation to enhance prevention, detection and prosecution of corruption in the health sector. Welcome, Mdu, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Amanda. I hope I am clearly audible. Let me apologize upfront about non-sharing of my video. Unfortunately, I'm connecting via my phone. I experienced challenges with my laptop, so we had to resort to plan B. But nonetheless, once again, thank you, Program Director, for the opportunity, but let me also thank SAMED for the opportunity granted to SIU to engage the stakeholders. SAMED is one of our strategic stakeholders in this multi-sectoral collaboration in the fight against corruption. So we really appreciate the opportunity to engage with the stakeholders in the health sector. But also, I would like to greet all the participants of the conference and hope we will interact fruitfully. And lastly, I want to extend the apologies of Advocate Mutibi, the head of SIU. Unfortunately, due to his hectic schedule, he couldn't join this conference. However, he was willing to actually participate. Unfortunately, due to circumstances that were unforeseen, he couldn't participate in this conference. But yeah, colleagues have been delegated from SIU to come and share some of the critical efforts and interventions that we are making in the fight against corruption, particularly in the health sector. So Caroline, I would like you to move to the next slide. Colleagues, this is just the presentation outline. Basically, these are the points that I will be touching on in the presentation. The first one, I'll just be touching on the SIU, about SIU, just highlighting the SIU and the mandate. Then looking at also corruption pandemic and the impact in South Africa. Then the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, Anti-Corruption Task Team. And lastly, we will explore the Health Sector Anti-Corruption Forum, which Summit is one of our partners there. If you can move to the next slide, Caroline. Yeah, colleagues, next slide as well about SIU. Just the next slide, Caroline. Yeah, this is basically the strategic overview of SIU. So we felt maybe let's just highlight this to the stakeholders. Many people hear about SIU out there. Maybe some of them have never had an opportunity to understand exactly what is the strategic overview of SIU. In a nutshell, this is how SIU operates. If you look at the top there, we have what we call the impact statement. In other words, what we want to achieve as an outcome for SIU in our efforts to fight corruption. We want to rid of society fraud and corruption in state institutions. Then our vision is to become the state's preferred and trusted anti-corruption, forensic, and litigation agency. And I have to emphasize this because this vision was crafted about 4 years ago. And we are starting to see now, SIU becoming more preferred by many institutions to conduct their investigation. But for SIU to come to that level where they become preferred and trusted, a number of strategic initiatives have to be put in place. One of them is to work on our turnaround time of investigation. We needed to make sure that we complete our investigation on time as well. Our mission obviously is centered around combating corruption through forensic investigation and civil litigation services. Then our motto is poised to strike against corruption. Possibly many of you have seen this because it is attached to our logo. Then broadly, if you look at SIU as well, we've got 3 delivery programs. One of the programs that we have is administration. This program basically support or enable the unit, particularly the program that is entrusted with the core mandate of SIU. Then program 2 focuses on investigation and legal counsel. This is the core business of SIU. So this is the mandate of SIU where we have to conduct investigation. Then third program, it focuses more on corruption prevention. So it focuses on market data analytics and prevention. So what we are basically doing there is to try and prevent the reoccurrence of fraud and corruption through some prevention strategic initiatives, through systemic recommendations that SIU make to the state institution to make sure that they implement them so that the very same findings that were picked up during the investigation does not occur again. Then if we look at the SIU value chains, this is how we operate. SIU, we don't just investigate. We have to receive allegations first, and that's where the role of the whistleblowers becomes important, because the first part of our investigation, we receive these whistleblower information, a report. Then once we receive them, we register them. We have what we call the case registration system, where we capture all this information. Then from there, we conduct the feasibility and scoping of the allegations that have been reported. Then after that, as you will know, that our investigations are based on proclamations. Without proclamation, we cannot commence with investigation. So then the proclamation stage will follow. Once the proclamation has been approved, we move to the investigation stage where actual investigation begins. Then from there, once it's completed, we develop what we call remedial actions. Then we report. Our act, SIU Act, requires that we compile a report and submit it to the presidents. Hence, many of you we would have noticed, even with the digital vibes report, which is more popular, it was submitted to the president because SIU account to the president. They have to submit that report to the president. Then the president will decide whether to release that report or not. After that, we will evaluate the investigation that we have conducted. So we will do what we call lessons learned, so that we learn from that as well. Then we implement that program which I spoke about, which is program 3, where we focus on preventing reoccurrence of the incidents of fraud and corruption. Then the last part is monitoring the implementation of SIU remedial actions. If you can move to the next slide, Caroline. Here, quickly, I just want to highlight the functions and powers of SIU. Next slide, Caroline. So that we are clear as well what is within SIU and outside SIU mandate. So as we've said, SIU was established in terms of the Special Investigating Unit and Special Tribunal Act 74 of 1996. SIU is a public entity that conducts investigations. And once investigations are complete, the president receives the final report with findings as we have indicated. So what are the major functions of SIU? 1, we investigate corruption, malpractice, and maladministration in state-owned institutions. 2, we institute civil proceedings based on the outcomes of the investigations that we have conducted. Thirdly, we do what we call referrals. 1, we refer, if we encounter some criminal elements in our investigation, we refer that to the prosecuting authority, in this case, which is the NPA. Then lastly, if we also uncover some non-compliance with what we call internal policies as well, we refer that to the departments to take disciplinary action against those implicated individuals. Now, what are the SIU powers? SIU is able to subpoena, search and seize evidence and interrogate witnesses under oath, but that happens once the proclamation has been issued. We are able to institute civil litigation to recover state funds lost or to prevent future losses. Now, this is important because this is the only what we call area which is within the SIU, what we call end-to-end, which we can do end-to-end. We can do this from A up to Z. But when it comes to disciplinary action and prosecuting, there we refer and rely on those departments that we have referred to implement. What is out of SIU mandate? Arrest or prosecute. Many people will raise this question. Yes, we've seen you have recovered money, you have cancelled contract, but when are the people, we're going to see these people in orange uniforms? The reality is that SIU does not have mandate to arrest and prosecute. As we've said, that mandate rests with the Hawks and the NPA. We also cannot implement disciplinary action. We refer them to the relevant state institution to action that those types of referrals. The only thing we can do is to monitor and escalate to the relevant authorities if there's no action being taken. Lastly, work closely with other relevant agencies where its powers fall short in order to ensure consequence management. If you can move to the next slide, Caroline. Now, these are when we conduct investigation in SIU, these are the legal outcomes that we seek to achieve. 1, civil litigation. We recover money, we cancel contract. 2, we refer to state institution matters where disciplinary action must be taken. 3, we refer to NPA for criminal prosecution. And lastly, we refer to other regulatory bodies such as SARS. If, for example, there's tax issues, we also report to FIC as well. If we can move to the next slide, Caroline. Now, in terms of the SIU key skills that we require to successfully execute on our investigations: 1, forensic data analytics, forensic accounting, forensic investigations, civil litigation, legals, and lastly, cyber forensic. These are the key SIU skills that enable us to successfully conduct investigations. Next slide, Caroline. In terms of the values now for SIU, these are the values for SIU: integrity, collaboration, teamwork, drive and passion, professionalism, cooperation, independence. But critically to our work is integrity. You know, when you do investigation, you get confronted. For example, some of you have seen it as well in the news, where we have a court case where one of our investigators was offered large money as a bribe to make sure that case goes away. So integrity is at the center of the work that we do, but also independence as well. We need to do our work, our investigation, without fear, favor, or prejudice. So these are the critical values that we have at SIU. If we can move to the next slide, Caroline. Now, here we broadly dissect the corruption pandemic and impact in South Africa. So what is the impact of corruption, particularly in the health sector? If you move to the next slide here, Caroline. Many of you knows what we have: corruption perception index. We have transparency index that come up with these annual ratings in terms of countries, how prevalent is corruption in different countries. As you can see there, the sub-Saharan Africa average score is 32 over 100 in terms of the rating. Now, how this rating works: from 0, you are highly corrupt, but when you go up towards 100, you are very clean. So as you can see, we are number 32. So what does it say? Corruption is still rampant and corruption in sub-Saharan Africa. But let's break it down and bring it back home now to South Africa. How is South Africa perceived out there in the world in terms of corruption and fraud? Next slide, Caroline. You will see the trends here from 2010 up to 2020. South Africa in 2011, we were rated 41, which is still an issue because we are still viewed as highly corrupt. 2012, 43, and so on. But the latest rating we received in 2020 was at 44. So it means out there, the perception is still there in the world that South Africa is a corrupt country. But we need to change that perception, because if we don't change it, it impacts even on investor confidence. So if you can move to the next slide, Caroline. One of our partners as well, Corruption Watch, they've done some number crunching. So through data analysis, they have highlighted that 28,196 whistleblower reports have been received since 2012. Now, this is an incredible number. In 2019 alone, 3,694 whistleblowers were received. So an average of 10 reports per day. So this tells you the extent of the problem of corruption that we are facing in this country. If we can move to the next slide. Now, what is the impact of corruption, particularly in the health sector? Well, globally, an estimated 7% of health spending, amounting to more than 500 billion per year, is lost to corruption and fraud. That comes from the World Health Organization. Again, globally, corruption in the health sector is estimated to cost more money than what would be required to achieve universal health coverage. That's World Health Organization again. The high levels of corruption are linked to poor quality of healthcare service. I think in South Africa, we can relate with this. We've seen, for example, the life Mdumiseni issue, where patients there lost their lives. I mean, the list is endless when we talk about the impact of corruption when we bring it home to South Africa. Poor people are at the receiving end of corruption, as 80% of people in South Africa rely on the public health care facilities. So some of us are fortunate to have medical aid. We have options. But poor people out there, they're forced to go to the very same public healthcare facilities with bad service because they have no option. 80% of people in South Africa rely on the public healthcare facilities. So this is a challenge which needs to be rectified. Then lastly, discovered in 2016 recovered 400 million in fraudulent claims on behalf of its clients, medical schemes, and their members. And this again, people complain about the exorbitant cost of medical aid. And this is one of the drivers of medical aid cost, the fraud and corruption in the medical scheme claims. If we can move to the next slide, Caroline. Then the next slide will explore the national anti-corruption strategy. So if you move to the next one, many of you will probably aware that in 2020, late last year, the cabinet approved the national anti-corruption strategy, which is more like a blueprint and framework for South Africa to fight corruption. But this strategy is premised on the fact that corruption is away at the very fabric of our society and is the scourge of modern democracies. Therefore, a comprehensive and coordinated strategy is required to combat corruption. So we need to implement this strategic intervention to even change the perception out there about corruption in South Africa. We spoke about the Transparency Index International, as well as the CPI as well. Our rating is not good, but we need to change that so that we build that confidence in the global community to even invest in South Africa. If we can move to the next slide. Now here, it's the vision of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy in South Africa that has one, ethical, transparent, and accountable state, business, and civil society sector in which those in position of power and authority act with integrity. Two, citizens who respect the rule of law and are empowered to hold those in power to account. Remember, when we talk about corruption, there is individuals and the state as well. So it works two ways. Then zero tolerance of corruption in any sphere of activity, substantially reduced level of corruption. So this is the vision of this national anti-corruption strategy. If we move to the next slide, Caroline. So the objectives are centered around one, citizens' participation. That's why we talk about multi-sectoral collaboration, where we have institutions like Summit being part and at the forefront of fighting corruption in the health sector and other health sector role players as well. Ethical leadership. We need to see leadership that lead by example, professional and skilled employees, transparent and accountable governance system, a culture of reporting and whistleblowing, protection of sectors most vulnerable to corruption. We'll talk about this because it talked to the Health Sector Anti-Corruption Forum. Strengthening anti-corruption agencies. We know even that at some stage, some of the law enforcement agencies were weakened deliberately so that they will be toothless against corruption. But this needed to be changed so that we change the picture around corruption. The next slide, Caroline. Now, these are the 6 pillars of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. One, promote and encourage active citizenry, whistleblowing, integrity, and transparency in all spheres of society. So we need to be all active in the fight against corruption. Advance the professionalization of employees in all sectors to optimize their contribution to create corruption-free workplaces. Enhance governance, oversight, and consequence management in organizations. This is important because one of the challenges is consequence management. There seems to be, in some instances, lack of appetite to implement consequence management. And where there's no consequence management, corruption will always thrive. Improve the integrity and credibility of the public procurement system. This is important. I will tell you even now that 90% of SIU investigations are centered around procurement. And the reason for that is that that's where the money is. Then strengthen the resourcing, coordination, transnational cooperation, performance, accountability, and independence of dedicated anti-corruption agencies. Then lastly, protect vulnerable sectors that are most prone to corruption and unethical practices with effective risk management. Health sector is one of those sectors that has been identified as vulnerable to corruption. Next slide, Caroline. Then moving to the anti-corruption task team, the ACTT. The ACTT is one of the implementing agents of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy and consists of all law enforcement agencies and other government departments. And the mandate for the ACTT is centered around a whole society approach to improve multi-agency collaboration, integrated operational approaches, and multi-sectoral collaboration or cooperation. That's why we talk about these sectors forum that we built, because we want to bring all the stakeholders so that we all fight corruption together. The ACTT establishment is derived from the 2009-2014 JCPS delivery agreement and consists of 4 programs. If you move to the next slide, you'll see those four programs. We have ACTT Executive Committee, which consists of principals of all the law enforcement agencies. Then we've got Program 1, which is led by the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation, known as HAWKS. Their mandate is crime operations and resolutions. Program 2, it's led by NICOC. Their mandate is intelligence and policy support. Program 3, it's led by DPSA. Their mandate is public sector policy and regulations. Then lastly, Program 4, why we are here, it's led by SIU. It's focused on vulnerable sectors and risk management. Next slide. Now, in this whole of government and society approach, what is the role of each sector or society in the fight against corruption? Because we all have to play a role if we have to win this fight against corruption. We got the role of government, obviously the legislation, capacity development in terms of anti-corruption mechanism, transparency in procurement, and all of that. The civil society as well is heavily involved, Chapter 9. But I want to come to the business or private sector as well, because I think Summit and all others, they will fall in that category of private sector. What do we require from you to assist us to fight corruption? One, in your ranks, we need you to promote ethical leadership. You know, you need to establish sound governance principles. Many organizations or these professional bodies, they do have what we call professional code of conduct, you know, which all their members have to abide with. So you need to enforce that and make sure that there's consequence management for non-compliance with the code of conduct. That's one area where we all have to play the role in the fight against corruption. Refrain from corrupt activities, including tender rigging, and report knowledge of corrupt practices to the relevant authority. Promote ethical business dealings between business and service providers. Collaborate through sectoral forums like the one we have, Health Sector Anti-Corruption Forum. Consequence management, I think I've highlighted that as well. You need to enforce your code of conduct as well. If your members are in breach of that, there need to be consequences. If we move to the next slide now, this one talks to the Health Sector Anti-Corruption Forum. As I've indicated earlier on, health sector has been identified as one of those sectors that are more prone and vulnerable to the incidents of fraud and corruption. If you move to the next slide, the SIU is the convener of Program 4. It collaborates and works closely with other ACTT stakeholders to ensure that it delivers on its mandate. The ACTT strategy mandate Program 4 to execute on the following: protect vulnerable sectors, which is aligned with the National Anti-Corruption Strategy Pillar 6, implement proactive intervention, conduct investigation, and of course, lastly, institute civil litigation to recover stolen funds. Next slide. Now, what is the objectives of this program? Program 4, the protection of vulnerable sectors. One is to identify those sectors prone to fraud, corruption, and any form of unethical conduct. Implement effective risk management to protect vulnerable sectors. Foster collaboration among stakeholders to ensure effective fight against corruption. Hence, we have all these partners that we convene in the Health Sector Anti-Corruption Forum. Now, how will these sectors identify vulnerable sectors? One, through anti-corruption testing. The AG conducts a lot of reports, of auditing. The audit outcomes also has helped us to look at those sectors where there's more issues then we are able to see that there's irregular expenditure, there's corruption and fraud, then we are able to consider that. We also participate in international forums like G20, BRICS. They also have done some great work around this space. Parliamentary oversight committees as well. Then civil society, whistleblowing report. This is very critical for us as well, because we all use this input to come up with this identification of vulnerable sectors. Next slide. The next slide highlights those sectors that we have identified as vulnerable. One, as we've said, health sector is one of the sectors that has been identified as vulnerable, and it requires immediate attention, simply because the impact, if the health sector is not working, it's massive. Look at the COVID-19 as well. The health, what we call facilities get overwhelmed as well. The quality of health as well is important. So the expenditure of government in that sector is huge as well. The other one is local government space as well. We have another forum that we have established, Local Government Anti-Corruption Forum. Then the next one is infrastructure and construction. Again, we have established the infrastructure built anti-corruption forum as well. We've launched it, I think, in May. So these sectors we're doing some work on it as well. So the other sector that we have also identified as critical, which should follow, is the NPO sector. We have seen a lot of NPO sector during COVID-19 becoming conduit of corruption. Some, they receive money as to facilitate corruption, not because they are rolling out programs that are aimed at improving the health services. The state-owned entities remains one of the what we call vulnerable sectors as well. I mean, we've seen with ESCOM, SAA, DNL, they can't even pay employees, some of those state-owned entities. We have load shedding as well, ESCOM. It tells you the magnitude of corruption, and corruption has contributed to some of those shortcomings that I have mentioned. The rest of the sectors as well, we will get into them as we proceed. If we move to the next slide. Now, what are the factors that we considered when we prioritize these sectors? We looked at the industry case studies, in the sector itself, the nature of business, magnitude of transaction and amounts involved. For example, we've said in the health sector, the government spend a large percentage of our budget in that sector. Propensity of actors doing business with government, high exposure to corruption of the sector itself. As I've said, the government spending on the sector, then the national foreign interest and security, and the last part, the NDP focus areas. If we can move to the next slide. Now, these are the common types of corruption that we have came across, particularly in the procurement. I've deliberately highlighted procurement there because, as I've said, 90% or more of our investigation at SIU, they are all related to procurement, So these are the issues or types of corruption that we have seen when we conduct our investigation. One, appointment of service provider not in central supplier database. Two, deviation and emergency procurement abuse. We've seen this massive abuse of this process during COVID-19. Abuse of turnkey procurement solution end-to-end projects. Cover quoting and splitting of bids to meet delegation threshold. There's some of corruption that we have come across. Fronting and unlawful contracting, inflation of prices and overpricing. I mean, if you look at the PPE, the inflation of prices and of prices there and overpricing, it's shocking what we have seen. It's actually, I think Advocate Ntibi is on record saying what we have come up across in COVID-19 is unprecedented. The payment of goods and services not delivered or meeting product specifications. These are some of the corruption we have seen. Some of the root causes of this corruption as well that we have identified. One, it's collusion. SCM officials, bid committee members, service providers. We've seen, for example, in the digital vibes, where the bid committees, they were all colluding to give favorable score to the non-deserving, what we call service provider to be allocated a tender. Conflict of interest. They do that, most of them, because they are conflicted or they receive unlawful instructions. Inadequate gaps or gaps in the systems and processes. use of transversal contract not considered. Here, National Treasurer has what we call transversal contract. Sometimes as a department, you don't have to go to the tender. You must go to the National Treasurer and see if there's transversal contract around that goods and services that you want to procure. Then you can use that. But because that is not convenient for them, they don't want to go through that route, even if they can use it. Lack of due diligence, for example, vetting and screening. But inadequate skills and capacity as well is another problem that, in particular around contract management. Poor assurance of processes, for example, audit, compliance, reviews, and risk. There's not those governance structures in place to provide oversight. Inadequate whistleblowing mechanism, including protection. That's another area as well. I mean, the recent incidents where one of the Gauteng health officials was brutally murdered. I mean, it highlights this area. It was a serious setback in the fight against corruption. Poor consequence management, I've highlighted this one as well. A lot of investigations are being conducted, but somehow, somewhere, these investigation reports gathers dust because there's no appetite to implement consequence management. Either people are convicted or they are protecting their own people as well. In terms of the health sector anti-corruption forum, as we've said, this forum was established following the Presidential Health Summit, which was held at Virtue Conference Center, Johannesburg, in October 2018. This is a multi-sectoral collaboration with an objective to fight corruption in the health sector. It was launched by President Ramaphosa. Next slide. The objectives or mandate of the Health Sector Anti-Corruption Forum: 1, collaborate and coordinate anti-corruption initiatives in the health sector. 2, multi-sector approach in the fight against corruption. Investigate fraud and corruption cases speedily. And lastly, implement prevention programs around fraud and corruption. So here we have realized that we don't have to be reactive in our approach all the time. So we need to try and prevent these incidents of fraud and corruption because it costs money to investigate these fraud and corruption cases. Next slide. Now, who are the stakeholders in this health sector anti-corruption forum? We've got law enforcement agencies, one, SIU, NPA, DPCI, FIC, etc. Civil society, we've got Corruption Watch, OUTA, Section 27, government departments, National Department of Health, National Treasurer, regulators, HPCSA, CMS, and you name them. Then private sector, we've got BHF, HFA, as well as Summit as well. They are our partners. Now, to date, we have received these matters that have been reported to HSACF. 25 allegations reported, 17 under investigations, 5 motivation for proclamation have been drafted and submitted to the presidency. Then 3 allegations closed simply because there was not enough information, or we had to refer them to other institutions as well. Now, this following slide is a breakdown of some of the outcomes that we have seen in those investigations in the health sector. If you can move to the next slide, Caroline. We have investigated the HPCSA. There is the summary of allegations that we received. Amongst them include irregular registration of doctors, unlawful or improper conduct by employees. So it's a host of allegations that we received, but the outcome that we have achieved so far: 1, we have referred 23 what we call officials for disciplinary, 3 former registrars of HPCSA, and 20 officials. And one of the concern we've seen there in that space, HPCSA, is the stability of leadership. I don't know. The registrar seems to be changing often as well. Then the other one, we have referred 20 officials for criminal prosecution because we have picked up criminal, what we call elements in our investigation, and 1 company as well. In terms of administrative referrals, 20 have been done to SARS and 1 to OHSC. And the money that has been registered is 637 what we call thousand, which has been referred to special tribunal for unregistered doctors employed in KZN Health Department. If you move to the other one, we have also investigated the Free State area and medical and patient transport. I think this has been in the news as well for quite some time. Here we have identified irregularities pertaining to the procurement of the contract and payment made in respect thereof. Referrals for remedial actions are being prepared. In Northwest, we had the same one as well. If we move to the next slide, same contract, Northwest Aero Medical and Patient Transport. Again, here we have brought an urgent interdict to freeze former HOB's pension funding pending the finalization of the investigation. In terms of the NHLS, next slide, Caroline. Here we have interdicted former CEO's pension. 3 companies were referred to SARS. Referrals being prepared for SARS again. CIDB, we've made 3 companies or entities involved. CIPC as well, 3 companies involved that has been referred there. And NPA, we've made 3 referrals for criminal prosecution. Then for disciplinary, what we call actions, we've made 8 referrals. If we can move to the next slide, the CMS, Council for Medical Scheme, some of the irregularities have been picked up in that investigation as well. 1 disciplinary referral has been made and completed. Systemic recommendation made to the CMS to implement and prevent the reoccurrence of the issues that have been identified. Lifestyle audit investigation has been conducted, 4 matters completed, 9 ongoing. Curatorship appointment, 2 matters and 1 matter completed. Next slide. In terms of SAPRA, we also had some what we call allegations against SAPRA that were reported to SIU, and to that effect, the President gazetted a proclamation after the 8th of 2019. In terms of outcomes achieved so far, 4 systemic recommendations are in the process of being referred to SAPRA. 1 recommendation for cancellation of a license, 2 disciplinary referrals, and 2 criminal referrals to NPA as well. Then the National Department of Health, the famous digital vibes. This was part of the R23 proclamation. We have what we call submitted a review application at the special tribunal to set aside the contract, because we have discovered that it was awarded irregularly. 8 disciplinary employees have been referred. I mean, I think we've also had a number of senior personnel leadership in that department has been placed on precautionary suspension pending the implementation of this action. This was as a result of these referrals that we have made. 1 executive referral, we've seen the minister as well has resigned. It was also based on our referral that SIU has made. 19 criminal referrals made to the NPA for criminal prosecution. And we've referred several companies to SARS as well for tax-related issues. And also we've sent a referral around blacklisting of some of the companies to the National Department of Health to stop doing business with them because they've been found to conduct themselves irregularly. Then lastly, we have received 11.5 million cash payment from one of the service providers in the digital vibe cycle, because they realize that now we are after them. We have launched our papers in the special tribunal. Some of them, they are coming forward and paying back this money without having to go through that process or court process. Then the COVID PPE in general, it's still part of R23 proclamation. We have 3 civil litigation in High Court, 17 civil litigation matters in the special tribunal where we want to recover millions of money, 88 disciplinary action that we have made, 82 criminal referrals for prosecution, 3 executive referrals, 87 blacklisting referrals for some of the entities to stop doing business with the government, as well as the recovery of cash that has been done. Then lastly, life estimate, I think this is also on public record. We've completed this investigation. These are some of the outcomes that we have reached. 29 criminal referrals, 13 disciplinary referrals, 11 administrative action, for example, where Some of the NGOs have been referred for administrative action, the blacklisting of some of the NGOs as well, recovery of money from those NGOs in the special tribunal. Those processes are ongoing. Then the last part I want to explore, Program Director, I'm about to conclude my presentation, is the corruption prevention initiatives. As you've heard when I was speaking about the Health Sector Anti-Corruption Forum, that we also focus on prevention. So here we have a subcommittee that has been mandated to implement corruption prevention program. These programs are focused on advocacy and awareness, risk management, data modeling, procurement corruption in the health sector, and whistleblowing and corruption reporting channels. So, but what we have done so far, we have, next slide, Caroline, we have implemented some of the webinars just to create that public awareness and sensitize the public around what we call corruption in the health sector. These are some of the webinars that we have run so far. Corruption pandemic in South Africa's health sector, NHI and its vulnerability to corruption, combating corruption in the private sector, when COVID-19 and corruption intersect. Then recently, we're focusing more on the whistleblowing because we have realized that there's issues in that space. We need to tighten that space as well. We have developed a concept note around that space, and we're running a series of webinars. We started those series of webinars with this webinar, Unpacking Whistleblowing in South Africa, where we had Advocate Mutibi, Mr. Hofmeyer, and Prof. Madonsela in that panel. And this webinar actually attracted a lot of interest because it was even broadcast on SABC 404 channel. The Program Director, apologies for taking long, but that brings me to the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Mdumiseni, and thank you for clarifying the mandate of the SIU as well as your value chain. You're certainly well poised to strike. We've learned about how the SIU's participation is structured and why it's so vital in the fight against corruption across our country. So we've received a small number of questions and we're just going to take the time to answer those. So we envisage that this session will end at about 12:10. So we had a question from Monica. If healthcare professionals are involved in corruption and you're going to work with the HPCSA, whose processes would then take preference? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, maybe can you just simplify it or rephrase? I think I didn't get it correct properly.
Oh, if a healthcare professional is involved in corruption and you're working with the HPCSA, then whose processes and procedures are going to take precedence? Will it be the HPCSA or will it be the SIU?
Okay, no, thank you. That's clear now. No, the SIU process, remember the investigation, it's got its own processes. It doesn't matter whether HPCSA is a member of the forum. It does not impact on the investigation. Investigations are conducted separately. There's a procedure for that. So it will have no bearing at all. SIU investigation processes will always take a preference. As we've said, our investigations are independent based. We investigate without fear, prejudice, or favor. Our investigations are allegation based, but our findings are evidence based. Hence, even when we get challenged in court, we're able to go and defend our findings because they are based on evidence. There's no witch hunt. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Kristen asked if the SIU is involved in Section 34, the Section 34 PRECA report. So that's the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act. And if so, have you seen an increase in those reports, the Section 34 reports?
Yeah, look, I think most of those reports, they'll go to the Hawks, DPCI. I remember at some stage we received some of those reports and we referred them to DPCI. One that comes in my mind is the GEMS. One of the board members there reported some of the incident of corruption there. So it was purely criminal in nature. So we had to refer it to the Hawks for further investigation.
Thank you. Frangelina would love to ask you, I know you shared your success rate in terms of the relative numbers of cases and how they've been pursued. How do you feel about your success rate? And do you think there's anything that SAMED members could actually do and the wider medtech industry as a whole to actually assist in making sure the SIU achieves its best results?
Look, the reality is that there's been traction in the fight against corruption. I think it's out there. Everybody can see the effort that have been made to turn the tide around, you know. So we have achieved incredible outcomes around this space, but we're not where we're supposed to, you know, to be. We want to change even the Transparency International ratings for the country through our efforts as well. So in terms of what we call the role of other players such as SAMED, as I've said before, the fight against corruption cannot only be won by government. We require all stakeholders to participate. Hence, we talk in government about a whole of government and society approach in the fight against corruption. So we expect the civil society, the business, the private sector to come on board. As I've said, for example, SAMED, I know for a fact that they have what is the code of ethics or conduct. You need to enforce that code of conduct and show consequence management for non-compliance from your members, you know. Collaborate as they are doing now. Don't work in silos. Even criminals collaborate before they commit any corruption. So we need to come together and work together so that we fight this corruption. But lastly, implement good governance practices as well. So that you are able to pick up some of these things before they descend into serious matters that requires investigations. Thank you.
Tanya has a great question there. Is there any protection for whistleblowers? So in particular reference to the very sad loss of Babita from Gauteng Health recently. Is there a protection structure for whistleblowers when it comes to health corruption? Yeah, look,
there is a legal framework for the protection of whistleblowers, which is called Protected Disclosures Act. But obviously, it requires some strengthening. I think there's been recognition in government sectors as well that really more needs to be done to protect whistleblowers. For example, I think even the webinar that we had, the first one, Unpacking Whistleblowing in South Africa, it highlighted some of the shortcomings within the act itself. For example, the definition of whistleblowers as well is limited, for example, to employees and you know, the issue of retaliation against what we call whistleblowers, you know. Some get exposed to financial burden because they get sued. Some of them, they have to go and defend some of the litigation in the process of trying to unearth what we call corruption. So all I'm saying is that as much as there is legal framework, but there is room for improvement, and there's that appreciation now in such a way that even in the anti-corruption task team, there is a whistleblowing team that has a task team that has been established to look into this legal framework, look at the gaps and see how it can be strengthened so that we protect adequately whistleblowers. The reality is that the fight against corruption will never succeed without whistleblowers. It's a reality that we have to face. And the recent incident where we experienced this brutal murder of Babita really set us back because some of the whistleblowers started to get afraid. I'll make an example. Some of you maybe would have followed our cases in the special tribunal where we had this border fence case that has been in the special tribunal. Some of the SIU witnesses, they pulled out of that proceedings simply because they were fearing for their lives. So it's a serious matter which I think government is looking into it as well and has recognized that we will never win the fight against corruption without ensuring safety and protection of whistleblowers.
Thank you, Mdu, and we really appreciate your time today. If there are no further questions, we're going to ask all the attendees to please complete the questionnaire here in terms of your value for the session. And thank you again, Mdu. We really appreciate your time, as well as all of the insights and the information that you've given us today. And SAMED really looks forward to future engagement between SAMED and the SIU, and we wish you well and health as well. Thank you to our delegates and also to our special guests. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.